In today's video, what I'm going to do is going to take barn wood like this, create it into a medicine cabinet. What I was given a long time ago was a old washboard that my client wants to use as the door. So the idea is that I'm going to use the barn wood to create the carcass, attach the door to it, and you'll have a space down below it so that you can have quick grab items, or you can open it up and then have access to the rest of what you need. So for starters, I'm taking all of the barn wood that I've collected and denailing it. The important thing when you're doing this is after denailing, it's probably a good idea to take a small metal detector and just pass it over top of the barn wood, or any other wood for that matter, just so that way you can make sure that there isn't any staples or nails or any metal bits before you pass them through your jointer or through your planer. What I decided to do was take the worst board out of the bunch and just pass it through my jointer enough times so that way I could get a flat enough reference to the surface, but also to keep as much of the patina gray of the wood and not compromise the total rustic appearance that I'm going for. In my previous shop, what I did was I've already jointed one side of these boards, and then I'm going to leave the other side as the barn wood because that's what my client wants. So what I'll have is a flat reference face to be able to build the box so it's nice and square, and then the outside of the cabinet will just have this nice weathered look. So now that all of the pieces are rough cut to length and they've been jointed to one side, I've decided just to do a quick layout and pick and choose what pieces that I wanted where, which ones are the sides and the tops and the shelves. And after all that was done, it was time to measure out the door or the washboard just to double check what my final measurements were going to be when I cut everything to length for the cabinet. Next step that I wanted to do was to clamp up the main cabinet and to stand it up and dry fit the door in. That way I can double check what the height was for the shelf that goes just above the opening at the bottom. To assemble the cabinet, I decided to use 18 gauge brad nails and wood glue. And I know that this isn't something that would hold all by itself, which is later on that you'll see I'll be routing in a back panel that's actually going to tie everything together so the whole thing doesn't rack. To install the back panel into the cabinet, I take my laminate router and I set it to the depth of the plywood that I'm going to use. Then taking the router, I route out the inside of the back of the cabinet where it's going to go. Now that's done, I'm just taking the ruler off of my combination square and extending the lines to the corners so that way I know where I need to chisel out for the corners of the plywood. I started by chiseling it out, but then realizing after that it's a lot faster if I just take my laminate router and actually hog out the majority of the material, freehanding it, and then I could use the chisel afterward to clean up what's left. Now that I got a finished opening at the back side of what I wanted to cut the plywood, I just take some field measurements and I go over to the table saw, cut the back panel to that dimension, and do a test fit to make sure that everything is nice and snug before I brad nail and glue it in place. Last thing I decided to do before final assembly is just giving everything a quick sand to get rid of all of the milling marks from the jointer and the planer, as well as to stain everything that I can before it gets too difficult to be able to stain everything in tight corners, and so that way I can avoid getting any stain or any finish on places that I don't want it. I've got one of these Craig Jig adjustable shelf templates that you use to butt up against an edge, and you can drill a bunch of holes, and then you can put in your pegs, and then you have your shelf rest against it. The problem with this is that the way that this is for the width of the shelf is that the peg is barely going to hold on to the end of the shelf. So what I have to do is kind of make my own. I'll still use this on a scrap piece of plywood to the actual width that it's going to use as an offset. I'll drill the holes first on the plywood. I'll rip the plywood down so I can get the hole to where I actually want it, and then I can use that piece of plywood as a template to drill holes into the side for this smaller adjustable shelf. Quick tip is that before you drill your stops into the side of the cabinet is you're always going to want to double check that your drill bit depth stop is set to the peg, so that way you don't accidentally drill through the side of your cabinet. Before attaching the door, I just decided to put a quick clear coat on top of it, and in this case I'm just using General Finishes High Performance Satin. I've used this on many different applications for tables and for other furniture, and I've always found that it works really well. So next up is just to attach the door handle and the hinges to the door, or the washboard. In order to do that, I needed to glue in some threaded inserts into the back of the knob, drill a hole into the door, and then glue it in place. Because this is an old antique washboard, it's not straight or square, so what I did is I just put it in the opening and I shimmed it to where I thought that it would look best for gaps around the edges, and also what would work best for when I put the hinges on, that it wouldn't bind or get stuck. Now that the hinges were on the door, the last thing to do was just to cut and chisel out the hinge gains on the cabinet. Thanks for watching this video, and if you did like what you've seen, then if you could please click on the like and subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you'll know when I'll post my next video. I do post my other projects on other platforms like Instagram and Facebook, so if you do have those, be sure to check them out at Luke Savignac Construction, or on TikTok as Luke Sav Woodcraft.